There was a time when Overwatch was the biggest hero shooter out there. However, for some bizarre reason, Blizzard decided to cut support and abandon it. And now, after a change of plans with Overwatch 2, the publisher hopes to reignite that passion within the community. Is the new game even different enough to stand on its own though? Or will it fade into obscurity just like the first one did? Well, let's dive in. First up, Overwatch's fall from grace was very abnormal. As a franchise, Overwatch has been on a bit of a strange trajectory. Like, at one point, it was easily the most popular shooter on the planet. On top of that, it literally invented the hero shooter genre that's so prevalent in other games these days. And even the game's lore cutscenes were watched by millions, which almost sounds like an impossible feat these days. Everything from the Overwatch League to the new hero reveals at BlizzCon felt like a big event, where everyone came together to celebrate this massive franchise that they'd invested thousands of hours into. So, what happened? How does something that feels like it's too big to fail end up slipping into obscurity like this? Well, there are a couple of reasons behind the original Overwatch's fall from grace. For starters, extra competition in the shooter space meant that Blizzard had to stay on top of its game when it came to fresh new ideas. Like, they needed to inject the game with new heroes and modes that brought meta changes with them. Also, let's not forget that back then, everyone was trying to copy Overwatch. However, perhaps the biggest reason behind the game's failure is perhaps the developers' inability to anticipate things. We mean, even when things weren't going great for the franchise, they were still good enough for a rebound. Blizzard, on the other hand, thought otherwise and decided that the ship had sunk too far, and, as a result, fans had to witness a video game death that wasn't even necessary. Obviously, it wasn't all for naught, because Activision Blizzard was indeed working on a sequel to the game called Overwatch 2. Up next, Overwatch 2's messaging has been super confusing. Now, whenever a developer pulls support from a popular game, it's pretty obvious that they're working on the next big thing, and it'd be naive to expect anything else. After all, no studio has unlimited devs on deck, and they've got to allocate resources and plan. Well, as it turns out, Blizzard isn't exactly great at planning, because when they pulled the plug from Overwatch 1, they didn't actually have a solid idea of what the next game was going to be. Like, yeah, there was some vague stuff about how there's going to be a PvE story mode, but apart from that, nothing felt like it was actually a big jump over the first game. As a matter of face, Activision Blizzard even said that they're going to let OG players play alongside new ones with some sort of crossplay. So, if the gameplay loop for Overwatch 2 was going to be the same as the first game, then what was the point of even abandoning it in the first place? Like, you get the issue here, right? Okay, let's say that we're willing to move past that and accept that reality. Now what? Well, confusion it seems, because the publisher still didn't know what it wanted out of the game, and it almost felt like the answers changed with every single Q&A session. So, what does Overwatch 2 look like now? For those who don't know, it's been almost 3 years since the initial announcement for Overwatch 2, and over the course of these 3 years, we've seen a pretty big shift in what the game is supposed to be like. The Overwatch sequel of today is nothing like what was promised back then. As a matter of fact, even the integration between the first game and this one has been thrown out the window. Oh, and let's not even open the can of worms that's the PvE mode, because honestly, no one really knows what that's gonna look like. So, fast forward to today, and we have an Overwatch 2 that's almost identical to the OG game. Well, in terms of looks at least. And if you put both of them side by side, most casual players wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. Now, of course, from the outside, this doesn't look great at all. In fact, after its final reveal before the beta, most people wrote it off, saying that it's going to suffer the same fate as the first game. However, reality is a bit more complicated, and it wouldn't be fair to just dismiss the years of work that has actually gone into the game. Next up, Overwatch 2 has a promising gameplay loop. Alright, with the bad stuff out of the way, let's move on to some positives that could actually propel the Overwatch franchise to its former glory. No, we're not joking. There's some really good stuff in there, you've just gotta look for it. You see, while it's true that Overwatch 2 looks virtually identical to the original, it's got a lot of other things going for it too. Besides, there's nothing wrong with the visual style and fidelity of the first game. As a matter of fact, we'd even go as far as to say that the 2016 entry still looks fantastic and up to the mark next to the current standards. And there are some subtle changes, like the shading and lighting, which may not seem significant at first, but when you combine them, they can change the whole ambience of a match. Coming back to the gameplay though, Blizzard has made one small change that's kinda turned the entire loop onto its head. Yes, we're talking about the move to 5 vs 5 matches instead of the old 6 vs 6. Now, on the surface, this may not look like a significant change, but when you actually play it, things literally couldn't be any more different. Seriously, Overwatch 2 feels like a brand new game, which honestly is the most important thing. Like, you could spend ages overhauling the graphics or the art style, but if your game feels exactly the same, then there's no point. After all, the game gameplay is king when it comes to competitive shooters. What's the difference between a 5 vs 5 and a 6 vs 6 match though? Well, for starters, you've got a single tank instead of two, which means that the teams aren't as bullet spongy anymore. This also results in faster matches that don't actually require much teamwork. Of course, if you're super into your competitive FPS games, then this might seem like a negative. In reality though, this will not only make matches more fun for individual players, but it'll also reduce bullying during matches. Why? Well, because people won't be able to blame their team's bad result on an individual anymore. So yeah, overall things seem pretty robust. Now, Overwatch 2's strengths go beyond the gameplay. Obviously, having a great gameplay loop's almost always going to be the most important thing. However, as we've learned from Overwatch 1 and other games like Halo Infinite, a consistent flow of content is also super important to keep a live service game alive. Like, take 343's Shooter for example. It had a great launch, the gunplay felt solid, and everything seemed great for Master Chief's latest adventure. But a long drought of content over the next few months after launch has kinda ruined the Halo Infinite experience. After all, there's only so much you can do with limited maps and game modes. Oh, and Blizzard doesn't even have to look elsewhere to learn the lesson because they've got Overwatch as a case study. Thankfully though, the post-launch content plan for Overwatch 2 seems super solid, with big season drops coming every 3 months. And, according to the official roadmap, it seems like that cadence won't be slowing down for at least the first 2 years of the game, which is great. How have they come up with so much content already though, especially when other franchises have kind of failed to produce similar results? Well, it all comes down to the fact that when Overwatch 2 was announced, there was a ton of stuff in the pipeline for the first entry. So, there's a ton of stuff backed up and ready to go. Obviously, it seems like they're gonna rehash stuff from the OG game, but when the players haven't even experienced any of it, does it even matter where it comes from? Not really. And finally, Overwatch 2 has a trick that the original didn't. Now, the thing is that the first Overwatch had most of this stuff nailed down as well, but still somehow failed to stay relevant. And yes, we know that Blizzard didn't support the game properly, but still, we've seen other franchises live way beyond their support, like Team Fortress 2. Overwatch 2, however, is in a great position because it's free to play, which means that the barrier to entry is already non-existent. So anyone who's even slightly on the fence is definitely going to try it. Plus, we're going to see a regular spike in player counts with each new season, which will also elongate the game's life. And, to be honest, if Blizzard manages to keep the content flow and gameplay loop consistent, then there's no reason to believe that Overwatch 2 wouldn't surpass the first game's potential. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think that Overwatch 2 will launch the franchise back to its glory days? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.